Hello there, it's me. And today we're going to talk about a world without the Black Death. You can ask me your questions below. I'll do my best to answer them. Let's dive right into it. And I really recommend reading that article. It inspired this episode a lot. He argues that the plague actually did help usher in the modern world because it contributed so much social, economic, religious changes. Some historians say that up to 60% of Europeans died from the plague. I mentioned how the labor shortage after the plague spurred the invention of the printing press. Well, part of what we call the Renaissance happened because of all the changes brought on by the plague. He points out that after the plague, there was a renewed focus on the individual. It wasn't just about God anymore. It was about the person, too. And that affected science. Also, if you have questions about this alternate history, please comment below. I'll try to answer them. I had a lot of fun making this video, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. Thanks. People started to think for themselves, observe the world around them, come up with new ideas about how things worked. Galileo Galilei was born in 1564, during the outbreak of the plague in Europe. His observations of the stars and planets helped pave the way for modern astronomy and physics. He was a man of science. But again, if there's no plague, maybe you don't have that same shift in thinking. Maybe you don't have the scientific revolution. The rich, wealthy merchants who'd gotten that way because so many people around them died suddenly commissioned works of art that celebrated life, beauty, humanity. And that's kind of depressing because we're used to living in a modern world. We love our technology, our science, our freedom. But the world we live in now is largely a result of the Black Death. Yes, there were other factors, other events that shaped the world. But the plague was a hugely important catalyst. And if you take that out of the equation, you end up with a much more rigid, much more oppressive society. It was a response to the plague. It was a reaction against all the death and suffering. But if there's no plague, maybe you don't have that artistic movement. Maybe art continues to be mostly religious in nature. Gutenberg was able to capitalize on the demand for books, and he developed this machine that would churn out pages much faster than scribes could by hand. But if there's no labor shortage, maybe you don't have that technological leap. And I'm sure there'd be other inventions that would be affected as well. If there's no urbanization, if people aren't leaving the farm, maybe there's less need for tools or machines to make that process easier. There are other historians that say it was closer to 20%. Either way, it was a huge hit to the population. When the plague hit, a lot of farms were abandoned. Fields were left uncultivated. Food production went down and prices shot up. So now, all of a sudden, you have this labor shortage. Landowners needed workers. They couldn't find anyone. So the workers who were still alive had a lot of leverage. They could demand higher wages because there simply weren't that many of them around anymore. And landowners didn't want their farms to go fallow. They needed food. They needed money. So they agreed to these higher wages. Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but it was. That little shift created an entire new economic order. It got rid of feudalism. Workers weren't tethered to the land anymore. They could go work in town. And this created a whole new class of people, the urban working class. The labor shortage also influenced exploration. I talked about this a bit in my last episode. Basically, after the plague, Europeans knew that there was a lot of money to be made overseas. And so explorers started heading out in search of new trade routes, new lands, new resources. But if there's no plague, maybe you don't have that drive. Maybe you don't have that urgency. And maybe you don't have the manpower to send these expeditions out into the world. So maybe you don't have as much growth, as much exploration. Maybe you don't have the discovery of the new world. For example, it ended feudalism. And I would argue it also ended religion. Now, I don't mean that people stopped believing in God or the church. I mean that the relationship was transformed. Before the plague, you didn't have a choice in whether or not to believe in God. If you weren't a Christian, you were a heretic. There was no room for discussion. After the plague, however, people started thinking for themselves. They questioned why bad things happened to good Christians. So doubt crept in. And once doubt crept in, well, it became easier to start new churches. You could leave the Catholic Church, join the Protestant Church. This hadn't really happened before. So yes, the Black Death ended religion. When I decided to research a bit more about this topic, I came across an article by Robin Lane Fox called "Did the Plague Help Create the Modern World?" I think the Black Death was kind of like when a parent puts a toddler in a timeout. We misbehave as a society, we get punished, and then we're supposed to learn from our mistakes and do better. Well, we did a pretty good job of that after the plague. But what if the parent didn't step in and stop the tantrum? What if we never learned from our mistakes? That's the world we're imagining today, a world where the plague never happened. How would religion be different in a world without the Black Death? Well, I would argue that it would be a lot stronger. See, the Black Death weakened the church because the priests didn't have answers for people. Why was God punishing them so hard? It made people question everything. And once people start questioning things, that's when movements like the Reformation begin. Martin Luther comes along and starts criticizing the Catholic Church, and he has followers. And this wouldn't have happened had there not been some sort of crisis that shook people's faith. After the plague, people were looking for answers. They were scared, confused, desperate, and angry. And the fact that the church didn't have those answers turned a lot of people away. Without the plague, there isn't that huge shakeup in religion. You don't have new churches being formed. Maybe you have the Catholic Church continuing to do its thing for a few more hundred years. The economy would probably be worse off as well. As I mentioned in the last episode, the Black Death depopulated Europe. Technology would also develop differently. What about the arts? How would they be different? And what about the scientific revolution? Again, I credit a lot of this to the work of Robin Lane Fox. So what does this world look like? Honestly, it looks like medieval Europe. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos like it, please subscribe. It helps me keep making videos.